Hi everyone. Welcome back to Art Atrium. We have our second exhibition on Milgate. But again, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Uyghur, Pichigo, and Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. So this is the second solo exhibition by Escher, although again, he's been quite a few of our group exhibitions over the years. And he always amazed me with his new body of work. So this current series of work, he's been working on it for quite a while. In fact, he was still working on it until this morning. So it's a fantastic body of work. I think the concept is very innovative. I think I'm very pleased that he keeps moving ahead with his art. To open the exhibition, we have a very good friend, Tsoutas. He's had a lot of different roles. He's basically at the moment he's an independent curator, but he had lots of different roles, which would be too long to read. But I'll just mention two. He was the director with Art Space, but also at SCA Galleries. He also curates a lot of exhibitions at the China Cultural Center. He's actually quite involved with Escher, sort of like helping Escher coming to sort of fix what he's trying to do and so on. So I'd like you to welcome Tsoutas.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone for coming along today. I think it's a lovely pairing of exhibitions, and listening to Elizabeth, there's quite a few overlaps in the thinking, although the resolution is quite divergent in sort of like how the artists both approach the subject matter and engage solutions in order to come to terms with what they're doing in their art practice. Thank you, Asher and Simon, for inviting me to say a few words in relation to Asher's somewhat mysterious exhibition of perforated photographic images. All of them are untitled, but under the rubric of time is the following movement. And in the title, I think there's part of the secret of what we're going to talk about. The subtitles of each of the works are, however, perhaps more telling of Asher's concerns, as they are titles that suggest a personal relationship with a particular environment, and in this case, Wooloman and Wellington townships in western New South Wales, where Asher spent his early formative years. But the personal reflection is something more than that. Yes, it is a catalyst for the making of these works, but for Asher, this essay of images that appears as memories of certain experiences of his past are a little more complex than the question of reflection or remembering, or even perhaps forgetting. And for Asher, I think these photographic constructions serve more as a phenomenological analysis of time and the awareness of temporality in his exploration of the narrative forms embodied in the experience of his life, and in fact the life of many individuals. And some of these remarks I owe to the thinking of philosophers like Husserl and Heidegger. The awareness I am referring to is in which the historical past is constituted in our experiences of the present time. And in a way, his photographs can be viewed in the context of the narrative or storytelling character of his experiences. And when talking with Asher, he can talk about each of the works and the bookends of the exhibition, which are church-related iconography, and the fact that comes from a background where his grandparents, I think, were missionaries. And I think that's an interesting aspect in reading this work. And yes, that in itself would be a legitimate way of enjoying itself, because the stories in themselves and the narratives that he evokes are in fact quite interesting in themselves. But in a way, Asher is not necessarily speaking to or limiting his images specific to a historic memory of the past. That would be almost an easy reading of the works. Indeed, insofar as his references of the past at all, I think it is in the context of temporality as a whole. He's speaking about the idea of time itself, the very idea of time itself, and the notion of the passage of time itself. The movement of time is the very focus of his exploration in the interconnection between past, present, and future. And in doing so, he uses his photographic constructions to question what they purport to represent. And in a way, you know, like it's interesting because whilst he is a storyteller and there is a narrative present in each of the work, somehow the constructions operate at right angles to those narratives. Sometimes they undermine those narratives because he's talking about other things. And the personal implications of memory and that time as a young boy, what they meant to him. But what is clear is they do not represent that time as indeed they represent the reality of the whole, or the reality of the world. These two notions are of course incompatible with each other, but what they have in common is that in either case, reality is indifferent to human concerns. His experiences of reality were not necessarily consistent with the idea of reality itself. These images are moments of time, brief moments of time, but they become more interesting insofar as he then projects, and this is where I think his work becomes critical, is he then projects his personal analysis into a social plane and into a social context that demands a rereading of the images, in much the same as people that know of Bertolt Brecht and his theatre of alienation, where he used history, a particular circumstance in history, to talk about the problems of the present and possibly the future. Bertolt Brecht wrote things like Mother Courage, powerful works in the pre-Nazi period. And he utilised specific circumstances to project a political understanding of an unfolding world and render new meanings upon that present as it moves into the future. And it is in the different reality that these works by Asher become more profoundly interesting, for it allows him to raise big questions pertaining to his concerns. So in a way, these works become a strategy for rethinking the world around him, a strategy by which to reimagine and rethink and re-problematize the world around him. Primarily the tension that exists between the idea of land and country as a statement of colonial occupation. The sewing, which I think is really evident in the perforations of these abstracted images of landscape, and he uses a sewing machine like that to sort of like move the images around in order to make the perforations. And I amusingly, noticed that that particular sewing machine is a bicentennial edition, which is amusing because it's kind of contrary to the politic that's implicit in his work. That there is the product of 200 years of occupation, And this here is something quite on the contrary. The sewing perforations of these abstract images of landscape suggest a sense of violence onto the land. No longer can they be viewed simply as innocent memories and recollections of place from the perspective of childhood, as they represent the current political crisis. And that current political crisis we experienced last year with a resounding no vote, that was really something quite disturbing from my perspective. That is a result of colonisation. The sowing represents the sowing of the land. Well, we talked about with Asher, the fact that the land was ploughed and so on. But what's interesting is that it represents a kind of inscribing that land, of ownership of that land through time, and a displacement of the First Nations relationship and connections with country. The sowing represents the difference in the relationship to the idea of the land, one being materially owned and closed, and the other being a spiritual connection with country. In a strange duality, Asher doubles the idea of perforations in his illuminated photographs, referencing the crisis between occupying the land and the tracks of Indigenous peoples crossing the land. And in projecting a social context from his photographs, Asher using his photographs to speak about what is unseen when thinking about memories or recollecting memories. When photography supposedly captures a certain reality, he blurs the photographs deliberately. And someone who uses the blurring technique, Gerhard Richter, but Asher uses it very differently, because I suspect Gerhard Richter was pushing memories firmly into the background and divorcing himself from his past, whereas Asher is using his recollection and his past in a much more critical manner of engaging the present. Asher brings his history forward to discuss the present and the future, to bring into sharp focus what is unseen in the reality of the photographs, into a different conversation with country, into a seeing beyond the edges of the photograph, seeing what's outside of the photograph, challenging both the politics of reality and the politics of photography. And all of this resonates in his idea of time, between his idea of processing his past in relation to the transition of time into his very, very different present. Now, this discourse of time can be read as a decolonising conversation, and I think that's part of what I've been edging towards, that what we're looking at is actually about rethinking sort of our relationship to land, or Asher's relationship to land and country, and rethinking our relationship to First Nations people and what that actually means and what that implies. And I think there's something extraordinary about these works, because the violence in the perforations clearly suggests that we've done something very problematic to this idea of country. And I can sort of like think about what Elizabeth was saying in relation to listening to trees and speaking with trees, that there is a different sensibility in both the exhibitions that is actually about renegotiating how we see ourselves in relation to this land. And I think that's a very interesting connection that takes place. But in talking with lengthy conversations with Asher, some of them on Zoom, because he lives in New Zealand at the moment, and actually looking at these works, there was something else that struck me. But I'm not going to talk about that because, you know, time is quite short about that, but looking at these lands, particularly these abstract ones, you know, like, and looking at the perforations in the projection, you know, yes, is a very clear discussion about land, but I think it also lifts off this land. There's something spiritual and cosmological taking place here, that the discourse of the land is being mediated through a cosmological and spiritual discourse. But that's another essay. Thank you very much. And I hope you appreciate both exhibitions, and you're welcome to enjoy.
And thank you for everyone for coming. It's a big crowd. It's more than I thought. And it's great to show with yarn. And it's great that Simon put yarn and I together, because I think we kind of flow in with each other in our ideas. We probably come into it in a similar place, but we come out in a completely different manner. So I think that's fantastic. Thank you, Simon. I mean, Nick has covered a lot of bases. That, you know, this work is deeply personal, and I've been working on this for 18 months. Just quite innocently, actually, just going into the dark room and going through the negatives of, you know, where I grew up and places that are, you know, special to me. And then it just sort of started. I started like scratching into the photographs and like, you know, watercolor, you know, textures, and just, you know, using my hands. And then for whatever reason, I was thinking about home. And Mum was always, well, when I was younger, she used to make her own dresses. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then, like, I remember as a kid, Dad doing some black and white printing, and, you know, vividly remember seeing the picture come to life in the chemical. So I was like, okay. So, and I think that it was because I've been away from Wellington for such a long time, and I love going back. You know, I advocate for it all the time. And so I've come home, and I just kept going down these rabbit holes. And then I thought, you know, I'll put it all together and just started sewing into the work. So it just kind of evolved, and you know, for 18 months, just continuously working through the work. And you know, when Simon, you know, offered the exhibition and the date, I was like, okay, well, it's time to pull my socks up and, you know, really start to think about it at a deeper level, but just trying to, you know, get an output that you know, that I'm happy with, I guess. But yeah, so I guess I'll tell you a little bit about the work. So this is 6 negatives. Four negatives are from Wollongong, which is just outside of Wellington, 15-minute drive. And as a child, we moved from Newcastle when I was 3, and so, you know, don't have a lot of memory of being in Newcastle, but all my memory is here. And we were surrounded by, like, hills and a creek, but, you know, and I was just about to say just then, surrounded by farmland, because that was the way that I perceived it, that's the way it was spoken about. And then through my life, I've been able to, you know, connect and work with First Nations people and hear and feel different perspectives and different feelings and deep feelings. And so then, you know, like for me, you know, I was coming back home, and I feel like for me this work is, you know, at the kind of the start of something. I've been working towards this work for, you know, all my life essentially. And I've been playing with the idea of light and time, and part of my thinking was because in terms of my relationship with this place, you know, we moved in '86, and it's never left me. So then I think about, you know, the people that I've met and First Nations people, and I go, okay, well, if that feeling's so intense, what is it like if your family have been here for thousands of years? What is that feeling? So, you know, with that notion, I guess, I can't even begin to comprehend what that feeling is, but I know what this is for me. So then I've, you know, put in the titles, untitled, but then I've also put in beside it what it actually meant to me, what my memory is. And the reason it's untitled is that I want, or I encourage people to have their own relationship with, either the work or with a space or a tree. I love trees as well, Jan. I'm very passionate. And so, it is. And then I started thinking about, in particular, a tree, and what if you loved that tree like your mother? How would you treat it? And then how would you treat the landscape if you look at it like your mother? So then all these thoughts and the complexity of it all have they're just flying through me, and I'm just trying to make sense of it all. And then, I'm just on a ride at the moment, and I feel like I'm in a good place, and thank you so much for coming. I could talk for much longer, but thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It is a great one as well, and actually told you that is just the beginning, so we're looking forward to the next step. But also, just to remind you, while these are an edition of 6, they are actually individually sewn. I mean, I actually saw Asher working with sewing machine doing it individually. So while we say that they are edition of 6, they are actually all slightly different. They are not, all identical. So feel free to come and see me to acquire one. But in case you're interested in the whole collection of 12, it's only $12,000. It's fantastic. So thank you again. Enjoy the exhibition, and have a few drinks as well. Thank you.